I'd like to thank the respective team members for their contributions in whatever capacity they could. I think it was a collective, of course, and team members are Rida and Laiba, and myself, Aleem Sheikh. Right. So, Allama Iqbal Rahmatullah Alayhi envisaged a world where Muslims grew and thrived in their respective fields, in a world where Muslims grew cognitive of their responsibilities of being the flag bearers of Islam. Because in any society, the status of the youth is a litmus test to the success of that particular generation. Therefore, if the youth is uninspired, it leads to a downfall of the society at large. And Islam, as we know it, is at a standstill, and it's a very difficult time to allow Islam to survive in a very pressing modern scenario. Therefore, in order for us to reinvigorate the glorification of our past leaders, we as the youth need to grow cognitive, need to grow a little more conscious of our responsibilities as the flag bearers of Islam. There are multiple ways to do this. The first, and this has been thoroughly identified today, is the self-identification process. It's to develop a sense of purpose. It's to be the eagle that seeks for a purpose, or like pushes towards a meaningful life, one that leads to one that necessarily involves detaching yourself from mundane worldly pleasures, including but not limited to powers, possessions, properties, etc. Things that spoil the minds of mankind, things that continue to allow us to succumb to the worst of our desires and forget what's really important in our life. We forget what's really important as a Muslim, and we forget what's really important as a contributor or as a server of the Ummah, right? So we think we need to focus back on developing a lifestyle that serves the Ummah, and through him, the Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and ultimately Allah Almighty. We think that's the kind of world we need to move towards. We think that's the kind of focus we need to revive in our lifestyles as Muslims. Right. So this has also been discussed in terms of what is quite essential for you to have in your heart in order to move towards a lifestyle that creates a good Shaheen. The first thing would obviously be to remove all ideologies from that heart, sparing the love of our Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. What this means is that everything else that does not cater to the love of Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam is just clutter and has to be discarded from your heart in order to revive that sense of purity that is needed to become a good Shaheen. And this is obviously derived through things like tasawwuf. This has already also been spoken by Arafat before in terms of deciding and reflecting on what is right and what is wrong, and what is needed as the Ummah, and what is not needed for being a good Ummah. Right? So the state of selflessness that Allama Iqbal Rahmatullah Alayhi talks about is one that rejects everything that glorifies oneself and submits oneself thoroughly to the path of Allah Almighty. To reject everything that glorifies ego, pride, and all things selfish, and to completely submit yourself to the worship of Allah Subhanahu Wa Taala and Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. I think, and what this results in is a scenario where you're guided directly, or your powers are directly delegated to you by our Holy Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And when our Holy Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam is the one that's delegating powers to you, success is inevitable. Failure is not even a question. And I think this is one of the fundamental reasons why Allama Iqbal Rahmatullah Alayhi was one of the pioneers in his field, and is a mark ahead of everyone else, because he was always cognitive about how he never has to forgo or abandon Islam in order to achieve his worldly ambitions. He always had to balance both the worlds. Despite it being a difficult task, he was able to do so because he was always aware that Islam is the way we need to carry ourselves forward. Last slide. Right. So towards a real Shaheen, dispelling all impurities from the heart is imperative in terms of purifying yourself first, because once you purify yourself, you are then able to identify what is right and what is wrong, and then pursue a path that leads to what is right. What is right, right? So demolishing all differences based on caste, creed, gender, etc. that creates divides within humanity is something that we need to take care of, and this only comes from the understanding of what the Quran ultimately talks about. Right? The basic prerequisite for building a society is understanding what the Quran's message is, right? Because the ultimate message of Quran, and this is something that's quite simplistic in our lives, but it's something we completely ignore time and time again, is the message of peace and peace and kindness. We think with these two tools, any society, regardless of how divided it is based on other factors like religion, race, etc., can be united through this common message of peace and tolerance. And we think that is something that we need to constantly reinforce, to not just revive the tarnished image of Islam that is currently painted out in the real world, but also to adopt it in ourselves, in our lives as Muslims. And this is something that we need to this is something we need to carry forward as being the flag bearers of the Ummah. His or her tongue needs to speak a language that cuts across all barriers, geographic or social, and bridges all hearts and addresses all mankind. What this means is that we need to learn to speak a language that everyone, irrespective of whether or not they are a part of Islam, needs to understand. And once we're able to make them understand that this message doesn't come from a Muslim, but it comes from someone who is a believer of what is right. And we think when you create that objectivity in people's minds, that is when they will realize that the only way to objectivity is through Islam. The only way to objectivity is by being a believer. Because once you convince them that there's only one way ahead, which is Islam, then there's no other comparison for them to make in the first place, right? So there is no other religion for them to compare it to. Therefore, Islam automatically becomes the winner. And we think that's the message we need to focus on as a Muslim. Lastly, right? So this is applying Islam's glorious past to pressing modern times. This is something I began my speech with, and this is also something that Allama Iqbal rahmatullah alayhi spoke about, right? The Muslim youth today has forgotten what it means to be a true Muslim. We have forgotten the past we have forgotten what it means to be a true ambassador of Islam. Because there was a time when Islam and Muslim thinkers ruled the world. We were pioneers in fields like engineering, in technology, in medicine, in astronomy, etc. And our presence was noted well to the rest of humanity. Today, that identity is lost because we have forgotten what it means to be a good Muslim. We've forgotten what our purpose is. Our purpose isn't to pray 5 times a day and read the Holy Quran. Sure, that's a part of our purpose, but our purpose is not just to learn Islam, but also to be the ones dispensing that information to the rest of the community. Dispensing that notion of what is Islam really talking about. I think that message can only come once you become pioneers in your own field. Once you become eagles of wisdom, or becoming a powerful mind that Allama Iqbal rahmatullah alayhi himself was, of course, and something that he also encouraged others to do as well. So he asked us to not just become great thinkers in our respective fields, but also to channel that message across the rest of humanity, but to be the ones to guide, to be the ones well equipped to not just be in political positions, but to also be in a position where you can directly contribute to society by being a figurehead that people can look up to, or being the role model that everyone like needs you to be, or Islam needs you to be in order for Islam to thrive. But lastly, Allama Iqbal rahmatullah alayhi dreamed of a world where Muslims construct a world for themselves where they can freely practice their faith. A society where Islam is not only existing, but is also thriving. Inshallah, we will move towards a world like that. Jazakumullah khair.